Hello, and welcome to the Museum of Latin American Art's 2021 Afro-Latinx Festival. My name is Juanita Trujillo, and on behalf of the rest of the staff at MOLA, I would like to thank you for joining us today as we learn more about the diversity of Afro-Latinx experiences and dive into the history of the African legacy throughout Latin America. Before we begin, I would like to thank the event sponsor that made this 10-day event possible and accessible. Please enjoy this short message from our presenting sponsor, the Port of Long Beach.
Hola, I'm Mario Cordero. Welcome to the Museum of Latin American Arts 2021 Afro-Latinx Festival. We are pleased to sponsor this event that highlights the rich diversity in our community. Throughout our history, the Port of Long Beach has long been a supporter of education, the arts, and community efforts that amplify and deepen the understanding of our cultural tapestry and impact. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy this exploration of the African influence in Latin America and Latinx culture. Felicidades, el Museo de Latin American Art. Muchas gracias por esta oportunidad.
MOLA receives additional support from the Robert Gumbiner Foundation, City of Long Beach, and the Arts Council of Long Beach. We're excited to be joined today for the program Anti-Blackness in Latin America by Zahira Kelly-Cabrera, aka @bad_Dominicana. Zahira Cabrera is an Afro-Dominicana mommy, writer, DJ, singer, songwriter, visual artist, some say social media personality, mujerista, award-winning sociocultural critic, and international speaker. Known for advocating for Latinx visibility and rights on social media and unfiltered social critique broken down in accessible language. Thank you, Zahira.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to all the attendees as well. Hi, thank you for having me, and thank you to all the attendees as well. Usually I start my talks by telling people that they should be prepared to pretty much undo their current conception of the universe. And that sounds very complicated. It's not that complicated actually, but it is complicated to be us, so that's why it sounds that way. When I say that you need to redo your conception of the universe, I say that because for the most part in all of the world and even our own Latin American countries, we view Latin America as a non-Black, brown space. To be a Black Latin American sometimes feels like you're a unicorn or something, because it's like, even though there's millions and millions of us and we exist in every single Latin American country, as far as the books you read at school, as far as the media, as far as just conversations around you, everything implies that we don't exist, or that we are some sort of super rare minority within the minority that is supposed to be Latin Americans. Mainly the way that history is taught about Latin America, I mean, honestly, most people outside of Latin America don't learn that much about Latin American history to begin with. And within Latin America, we are given a very sanitized version of our history that, for the most part, centers the conquistadores, like the conqueror, rather than actually like laying out the violence that colonizers really wrought, and like what that really looked like was indigenous people were in Latin America, in what we now call Latin America. All these places have their different names, still have those different names. But like, basically colonizers got to us. We all know the story, but it's usually laid out to sound like they landed on Plymouth Rock, like in Massachusetts, when in reality, I believe it was like the Bahamas that they landed in. And the first colony was actually where my grandfather is from, La Isabela, in what is now the Dominican Republic, on the north coast of the Dominican Republic, which is also where the first slave ships in the Americas arrived. So the way that we think about history and even Columbus Day, and whether we love him or hate him, there's just sort of like a void when it comes to like what the actual history was and how this got the name like America at this point. Colonizers came, they started their land grabs and their indigenous genocide. And when they realized that they could like, I don't know, get something out of the land agriculturally, and that it wasn't going to be enough with indigenous people enslaved, they got Africans from Africa. The first slave ships came to the Dominican Republic, what is now the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. And from then on, they kind of continued through Central America, South America, and every single Latin American country received shipments of slaves. Even the countries that we think of as super white now, and that might be taboo to put the words white and Latin American together, but it's a thing. There are white Latinos, there's indigenous people in Latin America, there are mestizos who are a mix of those things. There's Black Latin Americans, there's Afro mestizos who are sort of everything in one, like there's Asian people, there are people from the Middle East. Latin America is actually super diverse, but there is a mestizo supremacy that sort of reigns supreme, like sort of like white and mestizo supremacy that reigns supreme in pretty much every country. So for the most part, the ideal is the mix of indigenous and white, or white, which is like really the pinnacle. And for the most part, people pretend that Black people just aren't in Latin America, that we have nothing to do with y'all, or that we're just like an influence and not just actually millions of people right now, today. But the matter is that in Latin America, there would not be a Latin America as we know it today without the Black people that helped build it. Through not just slave labor, but just afterwards, all we do is labor. All we've done is labor for these countries for the last 600 years at this point. Black Latinos contribute to pretty much Latin American culture in terms of customs, in terms of language, in terms of spirituality, of art, music, of food. There's just like so many things that come from us and that are siphoned from us. And we're just sort of left in the dust. After everything is siphoned. Of course, I come from the Dominican Republic, and that's its own context. We're majority Black, even though a lot of people here do not consider themselves necessarily Black. In other Latin American countries, the context is more so of Black people being a minority versus white and mestizo people. But this is like a mental thing too, because I've had that, despite the fact that Black women are the majority in the Dominican Republic, I've had racist white Dominicans tell me like, oh, that's cute, you have an opinion minority. It's like, even though they are the minority in the Dominican Republic, like they still feel like the minority is us. Because again, that's like a question of like pretty much colonial mentality. Latin Americans love to pretend that we're all a rainbow and that none of the problems that the US has as far as race are problems that we have. And, you know, it's all unity and brown pride or whatever. But like the fact of the matter is it'll be like brown pride, but people centered do not actually have brown skin. Like they'll be like tan at the most or something and just white as hell. The actual brown Latinos are like nowhere to be found within brown pride, like 99% of the time, much less Black ones. This is why I've grown weary of Latin American spaces at this point, because they have a tendency to be extremely alienating if you're a Black person. When I go into Latin American spaces, they refuse to speak to me in Spanish, even though that's my first language. And if I do speak to them in Spanish, they just refuse to reply in kind, or they'll just like give me like a stank face, like because I'm a Black person. So it's just seen as like, what am I doing speaking Spanish? I remember in Mexico City, the same thing kept happening to me. Everybody kept speaking to me in English and like refusing to speak to me in Spanish. And I was just like, okay. And it's like Mexico has a bunch of Black people who are also like basically fighting for their rights and for equity, like the Latin American people in every Latin American country. And I was gonna say like the whiteness, we like to say that there's no whites in Latin America, but even countries like white ass Argentina has a population, had a much bigger population before they ran a whole genocidal campaign, but it's like there's still a bunch of Black people there. And what we know as the major export culturally of Argentina, what you always know of is tango, and that came from the Black poor clubs in Argentina, and it was forbidden for a long time because it was considered like too vulgar, mainly because it was Black people doing it. And when we think of tango now, we don't think of Black people. We think that like white people somehow thought that up. Like, excuse me, have you seen how complicated the footwork is in tango? You really think that white people came up with that, honey? Like, I feel like the meme from Bring It On, like, I know you don't think a white girl made that shit up. Like, I know you don't. And that just goes for all of the music in Latin America. Cumbia is extremely popular and it comes from Afro-Colombians. Vallenato that we know of through like the white Carlos Vives is also a very Afro-Indigenous genre. Reggaeton is from Black Panamanians and is now also white. Salsa is absolutely from Afro-Cubans with some indigenous influence. And when we think of it, we're like thinking about like Willie Colon and like all of these white men are the ones who become the face of it. Punta is Black. I can keep going. Merengue, bachata, those are both Black genres. And when you think about the fact that they're all Black genres with no Black people in them, how do you have the heart to say that in Latin America, we don't have the same problems as the United States? I would say we have more problems as far as race goes. In the United States, like you can actually turn on the TV and find like the Cosby Show or Martin or all of these Black TV shows or Black movies. When do you ever see that in Latin America? Never. We're not allowed to even exist in media. So it's like, do you guys really not have any problems that are like the United States? Is it only the gringo-fied Latin Americans who are talking about race? Or is it just that you don't listen to the Black activists who are in Latin America have been fighting for their rights this entire time? You're not listening to the indigenous activists in Latin America who've been fighting for their rights this whole time. Latin America, unfortunately, is structured to be like very settler colonialist leaning. That's why like, I actually had an argument with Residente from Calle 13. And he was in my DMs talking about there's no Black people in Argentina, they're only immigrants. That's a lie, by the way. And second, everyone that we consider Argentinian is like an immigrant or the child of an immigrant from like fucking Italy or Poland or Germany or wherever the fuck. You do not consider them less Argentinian because we value and place those settler colonizers on a pedestal, basically. But if a Black person happened to come from like, I don't know, New Guinea or something like that in Africa and is now in Argentina, they're never going to be Argentinian. It's the type of stuff where Latin Americans, like say Carmen Miranda, who was born in Portugal and just raised in Brazil, became the face of Latinas and Latinidad. But like, that was basically just living in Latin America for a while. She wasn't even from Latin America. Yeah, most people don't know that. And most people don't know that also her costumes were mimicking Black Brazilian women. The ruffled dresses, the carrying fruit baskets on the head. Those women don't carry fruit baskets on their head for fun or because it looks cute. They're out on the streets selling to support their fucking families. So you be out in the hot ass sun as a white Latina carrying a fucking basket of food on your head to survive? No. But you can wear that shit on your head because it looks cool or whatever. So it's like when we talk about the way that this has been appropriated, it's like y'all been doing this forever because Carmen Miranda is from, we're talking black and white films. You know what I'm saying? So basically, yeah. I had an argument with Residente, and it was like where he basically said that Argentinians, like Black Argentinians, don't even exist, and was basically saying like, well, you know, well, white people don't like me and I'm oppressed by them, so why do I have to worry about how Black women are treated in Latin America? Like, isn't that all the same? And it's like, how could you say that it's the same? Can you tell me that somebody like a white male, like Residente from Calle 13, really is on equal level with like a Black Latina? You know, can you tell me that a Black Latina would have the opportunities that he's had to become a millionaire off of Black genres, which is basically rap from African Americans, and reggaeton, that's from Black Panamanians, with his wardrobe that's usually leaning towards sort of like a pretend Black American thing, you know? Like that's his whole look, is trying to look like a Black American, but then talking down on Black American rappers and hip hop, you know? Like you have a job because of all of that. You're a millionaire because of Black people. My friend from Reggaeton con la Gata brought that up, like the reggaetoneros really didn't have shit to say about George Floyd, and it's just like, you guys literally live off of Black aesthetics and Black music and Black cultural production in general, because the people writing and producing the majority of this stuff are Black Dominicans and other Black Latin Americans who you never really hear about. And they even steal those songs from barrios here in DR and in Panama. J Balvin is known for that, and all the other Puerto Rican dudes be coming around here. That's also why you keep hearing Dominican slang in all of their songs or whatever. I mean, we recognize it as Dominican slang. But basically, with our language, as far as Black Latin Americans, especially Dominicans, we're considered to be the ones who speak the worst Spanish in Latin America. We're also the Blackest Latin American country. Like if we're talking about percentages, we're like the only majority Black country in Latin America. And y'all say that basically the way we talk, which is an extremely African syntax way of talking, with a lot of indigenous influence as well, is the worst Spanish. It means we're stupid and we're dumb and it's terrible and it's so ugly and like it's vulgar. And it means that basically we're just like empty-headed or something. But meanwhile, there's like just like Black vernacular in the United States, like there's like a social cachet to using our Black ass language and our slang or whatever. So you'll see the white Colombians and the white Puerto Ricans and everybody else using Dominican slang in their stuff, which is like Black vernacular, just in Spanish. But you won't see Dominicans, you won't see Black Dominicans. El Alfa is like an exception and he's one, and that's like now. For the most part, we're not gonna see any Black women. Like, when have you ever turned on Latin American media and seen something that even remotely censored a Black girl, even included a Black girl anywhere? It just doesn't happen. It's like in the United States, there's a certain fetishism to being a light-skinned Black woman, especially if you're also Latin American, which is like considered like exotic or something. But like there's like this space that's created for light-skinned Black women, and like all the Netflix shows have to have some mixed light-skinned women. And in general, that's what's censored. of course, to like the demise of darker skinned women, because it's like we don't get treated the same. I can't say that I get treated the same as a darker skinned Black girl because I don't. And like I can admit to that. I don't know why non-Black Latinos find it so hard to admit that we don't get treated the same either, and that they have privileges in that way. But in Latin America, while there is colorism as well, and it still works that way, lighter is better, darker is worse. You're not going to turn on the TV and see light skinned Black girls. You're not going to see Black girls at all because we're still Black, pretty much. You're not going to see Indigenous families. You're not going to see Indigenous people unless it's like a ugly ass caricature, like La India Maria, who's like supposed to be very rough and tumble or something, and like supposedly stupid and sort of just like unfeminine or something like that. It's just like really ugly stereotypes, or Indigenous women will be sort of in the background. They'll be like the peons on the hacienda that belongs to a whiter Latin American. And it's like, yo, that's really is how y'all structure shit to this day though. So Latin Americans in the United States have a tendency to censor themselves a little bit too much in Latin Americanness. I say this as a Dominican American who is living in the Dominican Republic and have for like back and forth like half of my life. Like I went to school here and stuff. And I moved back here almost 2 years ago at this point. But Latin Americans censor themselves too much in North America, when they go to North America. And I mean that to say that there's like this victim stance that is taken with no like cognizance of the fact that you're also oppressors. So it'll be like complaining about the maid stereotype in the United States, which is like really real. But in Latin America, there is a main stereotype for Black women, for Indigenous women, not necessarily for white Latinas, because the same sort of structure exists within us. So it's a lot of people demanding justice for minorities in North America or Europe, and then turning around and in Latin America telling Black people like, I'm sorry, like why should you matter or be represented? Like you're just a minority. You know, it's like Latin Americans begging for Hollywood representation because they've only had these 3 shows and these 17 movies or something. And then I'll just be like, okay, so show me the stuff that, you know, you do with Black Latin Americans. What representation do you give Black Latin Americans? Do you allow Black Latin Americans? What resources do you allow us to even do all of that in Latin America? Right, way less than you get in the US, right? So what makes you think that you're more human and more deserving and that you should be represented even though you're a fucking minority in the United States? But Black Latin Americans don't deserve shit in Latin America because we're a minority. And nobody can tell you nothing about that because, well, white people oppress you. So like, why should I have to think about this? This is basically the this argument. Like, I just want y'all to know, like, you need to get your fucking life together if you're thinking that way. If you want people to be conscientious about your oppression, your erasure, your marginalization, you need to be conscientious about the way that you do that to Black people and Indigenous people in Latin America as well. Being oppressed does not mean that you can also be an oppressor. A mestiza is a subaltern, you know, the underdog or whatever. In the United States, but in Latin America, mestiza is the ruling class. The underdog is Black women and Indigenous women, not you anymore. And it's like all of those complex dynamics are occurring within each other all of the fucking time. Like, does it sound complicated for you? Well, it's a lot more complicated for us because y'all get the luxury of saying that you experienced racism for the first time when you left your country, which speaks to your social privilege as part of the ruling class as non-Black Latinos. But like, I can just stay home and experience anti-Blackness every single day. Anywhere I go in Latin America, I'm gonna be experiencing anti-Blackness as kind of like a rule, you know? I don't have to leave for that. And if I do, anywhere I go, it's going to happen. I have to deal with anti-Blackness and the xenophobia that y'all deal with. For both of y'all, from non-Latinos and from Latinos. It's to where like I'm very much with Alan Pelaez Lopez, who's Migrant Scribbles on social media, a poet and thinker, and just all around amazing person, who thought up or brought up Latinidad is canceled as a hashtag. And that to me is just like, bro, this makes so much sense. You know, like yesterday I had a conversation about how somebody was like, a Black girl was like, well, oh, you're my people, I'm your people. You know, like she's just trying to get the people who will not speak Spanish to her because she's a Black person to understand, like, here, we're the same people. And I just kind of like, I don't believe that we're the same people anymore. If we were the same people, then you wouldn't have made it so clear that I'm not one of you and that I'm not your people. This is kind of like saying that white Americans are Black people's people, like Black Americans people, just because they're both in the United States. Like, how is it worked out between them? Are they really each other's people? Like, and honestly, those dynamics apply to Latin America too. Why? Because we did it first. What we now know as anti-indigeneity and indigenous genocide and all those land grabs, what we now know is Black slavery and anti-Blackness, and like the creation of those that social structure where white people are at the top, and then, you know, the darker and more indigenous and more Black you get, the more you are at the bottom. You know, that started in Latin America with the Spaniards in all of our countries. And the British were like, damn, that's kind of hot. I want to do that. And they fucking did. They did it. They were completely inspired by what Latin America did first. And when we talk about slavery, 90% of the Black people who arrived in the Americas landed south of the Mexican border, not in the United States. We're Latin American. The majority of Black people in the Americas are Latin American. And basically, it's like anti-Blackness is something that exists in all of our families. It looks like a lot of things. It starts, for me, it always starts at like a very basic fundamental level where it's just like being Black is associated with all the worst things that you could possibly be. It means you're not smart, you're probably criminal, you're probably a thief, you might be a rapist, you might be, if this sounds familiar, like the stereotypes that non-Black Latinos face in the United States, this is what I'm getting at. Y'all subject Black people to the same thing that white people do to you. And yeah, you do need to call it out among each other, among your family, among all your people. And as I always say, like, we have to talk about beauty standards because of the fact of the matter is beauty is power, and it's associated with basically whoever's at the top of the hierarchy. And that's white, cis, thin, rich, mainly hetero people. So it's like beauty is assigned according to how close you can get to that, not really what is beautiful. There's no objectivity in that, as much as they'll do their scientific studies that have just figured out that some like super glam white girl from Sweden or something is the most beautiful, the most scientifically beautiful person on earth or whatever. That's not true. You can't tell me that indigenous people and Black people, you know, pre-colonization, when they thought about who is a beautiful person, they were thinking about a white person. They wasn't. They hadn't even seen white people before. Their ideals were themselves, you know, and there's proof of that. Almost every historical account says that indigenous people thought like white colonizers were like weird looking, ugly, you know, like there was like, can you even breathe? You look like a potato. Like, there's footage of an African tribe being contacted for the first time in like the 2000s. And literally the Black like chief of like the tribe is just kind of like so what's wrong with these people? Are they okay? Did somebody skin them? You know, because as far as they're concerned, you can see the white meat and the like pig meat when you skin yourself, when you're like you've been skinned. So it's like, are white people that? Because it looks really disgusting, you know? And it was just like, yo, nobody was looking at white people thinking that they were the most beautiful thing that they've ever seen. It's the opposite. Everybody's like, you motherfuckers is funny looking. In Africa, in a lot of places, the ideal was actually to be a bigger, darker Black woman that was like considered the sex symbol, the fertility symbols. It was like very heavy set, basically Black women, which is very much linked to like say how that what was at one point the beauty standard in these places like became the asexual, just desexed, not even asexual, but just desexed mammy, you know, who's just there to like pretty much take care of your household and offer emotional support or something. It's seen like, you know, like that wouldn't even be somebody who you would think of having sex everywhere, being desirable. And it's like when you think of the juxtaposition of how quickly things changed, you realize that beauty is like racism in itself. It's like racism is basically like being obsessed with what you consider to be more attractive and beautiful, and it happens to be whiter people. The whiter, the better. We can also talk about colorism and how, while it's been exacerbated in, say, like the East by colonialism, no doubt about that, they still had certain systems that were colorist and ultimately like meshed very well with anti-Blackness because it was about like, you know, if you're darker, it means you've been out in the sun like a fucking peasant. Whereas like I'm lighter because I'm richer and I don't have to do that kind of work. So I'm better than you. And it's like that still leaves it as the darker you are, the worse. And if you happen to be a Black person, a dark skinned person, then that is the worst thing that you could be. Like all of these dynamics exist within Latin America and outside of it. And it's just seen as very coincidental. I just happen to hate all the Black things. I think that skin when it's too dark is ugly. I think that you look dirty. I really don't like dark eyes. I prefer them blue or green. And if they're like smaller or maybe hooded, like that's, I want round blue or green eyes. I want like a little thin little nose that you only get when your people come from the very high mountains where it's fucking cold and everybody's white, you know, like type of shit. And it's just like, even though Black people will have those type of noses and whatever kind of features, like we have the most actual variety within Blackness. But and now it'll be stuff like before Black people for having bigger lips would be made fun of. It would be something that would be like part of the caricatures, the Sambo caricature, like the big red lip. And now it's become a thing where like everybody wants to have them. So lip filler is huge. But if you are a Black person who actually has them naturally, like there is a problem. And that kind of goes with everything. It's the same thing with like our aesthetics, our music, our anything. Everything is a problem if it is Black people doing it, but when anybody else, it's like a genius and super creative. There's just like a general denial of all the way that these things intersect and all the fact that like, oh, well, you happen to hate hair that is cottony. It has to be like white people's wispy in the wind or whatever. Like, that is just a coincidence. If you ask Dominicans, what is a beautiful woman, they're going to talk to you about a white woman. Most Latin Americans are going to point to some sort of white woman who just so happens to have sort of like mixed Black features, like maybe have bigger lips and a bigger butt or something like that, but conveniently still white though. It's like that, like the Latin American ideal is like white Creole, basically. It's not like straight white, but it is still white and it is still, basically all leaning towards colonialism. So with that said, it's like, when we think about all of those ways that you're just anti-Black, like in a very casual way, it's just very easy to brush it off and just be like, we don't have that here. No, it isn't. But it's like you're still leaving Black people in the dust and without resources over being Black. You're still treating Black people like shit. We're still denying Black people services. You're still being anti-Black as fuck towards Black people. You're being violent in physical and emotional fucking ways. You're leaving them out of industries. You're like doing all of this stuff and then just kind of looking away and being like, well, white people oppress me too. And it's like, does any of that sound familiar? Because yeah, where do you think that you learned all of these systems from white people doing it to you? You feel me? And it's like, when I try to have these conversations in Latin American spaces, there's always so much pushback where it's like, either I'm exaggerating and I'm playing victim, or it is true, but who cares? You just deal and go on with it. Or it's just a plain old lie. And none of that exists. And I'm just making it up and bringing Latin American discourse. Just forget all of the Black activists all over Latin America who've been doing this work for hundreds of years, literally. And it's all recorded if you actually look for it, that this is not coming from Latin America. Which brings me to the issue of the X in Latinx and people using the X to neutralize things. The rumor, the lie that supposedly that is a Latin American or like white academic thing and that people in Latin America have nothing to do with that. No. Approximately 3 or 4 years ago, I visited Colombia and was among basically Black Colombians the whole time. And they use the X. That's where I learned to use it. They're not academics. Okay, they're not Americans. They don't give a fuck what you're doing. Their discourse is more advanced than yours, basically. And they're Colombian and you only don't know about it because you don't bother to fucking find out. But anyway, they have been using the X for years there. So how are you gonna tell me that this is new and that it came from the US, from academics, when people have been doing that in Latin America for ages, whether it be the X or using the little @ sign to neutralize the gender or using an A to neutralize the gender. Like people have been doing all kinds of stuff, specifically in queer communities, queer marginalized communities. I was among Black queer people and that's what was comfortable for them because they don't fit the gender binaries. And it's just like, again, we're colonized people. We had our languages taken away from us. You can't be out here policing Black people's fucking Spanish because we don't owe the colonizers anything after they took everything from us. We don't owe y'all fucking reverence of that colonizer language. You don't owe that either. We remix it in every country, basically, according to like what is our background and our taste or whatever. Every country has their own remix of that Spanish and we don't owe them nothing. So you don't need to be defending the integrity of the fucking colonizer's language. You don't want to use the X or any of those other options, and don't fucking do it. And if people do, well, then that's what the fuck they're gonna do. Context is not universal. Like it's really easy to just accept that and go. Your reality is not everybody else's reality. I have to know about non-Black Latin American, mestizo, white Latino, absolutely everything. I don't get a choice in that because you're centered in Latin American everything. You, however, never have to know about Black Latinos or what they're going through, like hella police brutality in Latin America, just like in the United States. We are like the poorest people in the hemisphere, you know? And it's like, you don't know about us, but we're still here, but you have a choice to just not know about us. We don't. So I guess what I usually like to leave people with is, and I don't necessarily want to center media always, but it's just such a reflection of the reality, you know? And it's just like, what has to change for like, you know, these novelas that are mainly white Latinas being loved and adored and people moving mountains to be with them? Or a light-skinned mestiza, because they can't be a mestiza who's a little bit too dark and a little too indigenous looking, because then they're gonna be the peon or like the poor people in the barrio. Like you can't be the fucking protagonista, you know what I'm saying? But it's like, what has to happen for you to like turn on Latin American media, whatever it might be, even if it's just the history books, and just see outright Indigenous people just being human in their families, in their lives, Black people being human, disabled people, queer people, Black trans girls being loved just as much as a cis hetero Blanquita. Like, how much has to change? How much do we have to address within ourselves before we reach this so-called Latin American rainbow where everybody is the same? Like, how much much do we have to address within ourselves and our families and our communities? You talking shit, basically. So with that, I am ready for the questions.
Thank you, Zaida. That was fantastic. And we have a couple of questions for you. One that came in from Giovanni in the Q&A, asking about how you feel about the diaspora within Dominicanos on the nation island and the US residing Dominicanos in regards to Blackness. Do you see a difference? And if so, what would that difference be?
There's a question, what do I see between Mexicans?
No, Dominicanos.
Did you say Dominicanos?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear right.
That's okay. The difference between Dominicanos on the island and those that reside in the US in regards to Blackness.
In the US, we are much more heavily influenced by the Black Power movement of Black Americans, especially, and also just from the diaspora. Like in the Dominican Republic, we don't really have those influences. Nobody's ever seen the concept of Black is beautiful, Black power type of stuff just out in the open like that. We haven't seen Black people openly challenging that kind of thing. It happens, by the way. There is a pro-Black movement in the DR here, and it is small, but it is very strong, but at the same time, it's very suppressed by the state. So you're never gonna hear about that either, unless you're like on the ground and you're like looking for it. But for the most part, there's just a denial about talking about race, and there's just a lot of like, it's not racism, it's just that white people are prettier and better and classier. Like, what you want me to do? It's like, is it my fault that Black people are the opposite of that? Like, that's their personal problem. Like, that's just how it's seen here. Whereas in the United States, those of us who are like raised there have more of a propensity to be questioning these things. But look, I've been around Dominicans in the United States, like, they're like same or even worse than the ones on the island in the terms of just like denial of Blackness and like of all of these racial dynamics, you know, and they're very rah America. I thank them so much for giving me the opportunities, and it's like without thinking about like the Dominican Republic is in the way that it is because of these fucking colonizers, and the United States owes us reparations for 2 different occupations actually. So it's just like, they're not even doing you a favor, and they're not fucking treating you the same way as they treat their white people. Like, it's just like a Stockholm syndrome kind of energy. I'm glad that a lot of us are getting away from that on the island and in the United States, but those sort of the differences. It's like we have less influences to look to. It can look a lot less militant in the Dominican Republic than it does in the United States. That's also because DR is not even safe to be militant here. They'll run smear campaigns on you in the papers. They'll come to your house with weapons to fuck you up, like in a gang type of stuff. You'll get a bunch of death threats. You'll get arrested. There's a lot of suppression, basically. It's smaller here and there's a lot less accountability. So you have a lot more to lose. And that sounds like the US, and it does, because it's like, it's happening just not at that scale. So that's pretty much the difference.
Thank you. We have another question that came through email Someone is asking, what are some validating affirmations that they can use whenever their Latinidad is denied because she is a Black Puerto Rican? So she wants to know what validating affirmations can be used whenever this happens, instead of spiraling into shame and digging themselves out of the abuse of gaslighting when their Latinidad is denied.
All right, so I'm gonna be a little bit cocky and I'm gonna use some language so like you can bleep for me. But number one, these bitches wouldn't have shit without me. You could say that with your whole ass fucking chest because they wouldn't. Everything that they claim that they love about their fucking culture comes from you. So it's like you didn't really need Latinidad, Latinidad needed you. Okay.
And then the second part of the question is if you have any self-care resources specifically for Afro-Latinx folks.
Resources, I can't tell you about that. That's not necessarily my area. I can tell you that my situation is one of being a Black single mom trying to survive on my own and all of this madness as a Black Latina. So self-care for me is a complicated thing, and I don't necessarily have the resources myself because we being real here, that shit is not accessible to everybody, and it isn't accessible to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes self-care for me just looks like staring at the walls and not being bothered by anybody else, just not going outside because it's like outside is just not safe. But yeah, unfortunately, I hate to get too real, but it's like I don't have the resources either because I'm not talking about just theory. This is my life. That's why I started this work.
And then we have another question from Isis. What literature would you recommend about anti-Blackness in South America?
Literature. This goes into the second question, like basically those type of resources. I'm not an academic. Everything that I know is from self-research and really hard knocks. It's not even my lane or my place to be up in the literature or whatever. But I know that if you go to pages like say Dash Harris, Afro-Latino Travel, you could find resources about things like that because that's their area, basically. They're out there, it's not a lot, but yeah.
And then one more question here in the chat. You've been talking about anti-Blackness in Latin America. And so this person wants to know, what do you think the solution is to anti-Blackness?
Honestly, if you listened at any point in time, I would just hope that it would make you look at things within yourself and around you and know that none of those things are acceptable and they're things that you have to change. Like, you have to start that change on an interior level and around you, basically. And it starts with recognizing all of the things that I mentioned and not brushing them off as just the culture, just how people are, and just like, you know, or denying that there is a problem altogether. It literally starts with acknowledging all of that and then actually extending a hand to Black Latin Americans. It means asking when you're in a room and there's a bunch of Latin Americans and none of them are Black and none of them are Indigenous, like what the fuck happened here for us to get here and be without the two most essential parts, you know, that everything that we have is based upon, pretty much. You need to ask those questions and you need to bring those people in, basically. It's like you have to question the people around you when they're going to engage in anti-Blackness and be violent, whether that be like, you know, physically or emotionally, because honestly, it happens on every level. But yeah, that is where you begin, honestly, like you have to.
Thank you. And then a question about the term itself, Afro-Latinx. What does it mean to you? Who do you believe should identify as Afro-Latinx? This question is coming in the context of how we're seeing a strong reversal of the one-drop rule, or the idea, the one-drop rule idea of Blackness in the US, as well as an abuse of the term from non-Black Latinx people.
I've personally, along with a lot of people in my circles, have grown discontent with that term. We've kind of dropped it. Sometimes we use it just because people now have more of an idea of what that means. But because it's just been co-opted, like it was supposed to mean that you're a Black person from Latin America, nothing more, nothing less. As in, if he wasn't identifying as a Black person, like, you just have no business using it because it's literally for Black people from Latin America. But it became like a thing where it's like, well, I'm sort of mixed and I have some sort of Black ancestry, or whatever, or maybe my great grandmother was, or, you know, type of stuff. And it's just like, but like, are you read as a Black person? Is this like your struggle? Because having ancestry that's Black or indigenous or whatever doesn't mean that that's what you are and that's the life that you live. I have some white ancestry. Can I be out here calling myself a white Latina, and am I going to be accepted as such? No, right? So it's just kind of like, you need to know your fucking place. If you're calling yourself Afro-Latina, it should mean that you have a deep respect for Black people and for like the struggle of people who actually look Black. Because it is that petty. It is about how the fuck you look. You know what I'm saying? If you have real respect for that, then you'll know your fucking place in relation to them, basically. And if you're acting like there's no difference between you being mad ambiguous or nobody knowing you're Black until you tell them, versus somebody who's just Black and is just treated as such, regardless or whatever, because that's how they look. Like, if you cannot differentiate between the two and you're gonna like get in your fucking feelings and play victim when somebody tells you about it, like, you don't actually have a respect for the Black people who are going through this shit. So just take it out of your mouth. Like, that's just how I feel about that. You can say that you're Afro descended without like pretending that you live the same life as a Black person. And because so many people insist on that, it's like, okay, y'all can keep it. Just because you're like a white Latina with a little bit of curl in your hair, you're gonna call yourself Afro-Latina, that's cool. And you'll say negra. Me quedo con negra, you can have that now. And it sucks because we really put in so much work to bring this into the forefront. And it became a fucking bandwagon for people who just have never had to deal with anti-Blackness in their lives. Like, so yeah.
Thank you, Zaida. I really appreciated all of your responses to the questions from our participants. I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A or in the chat. Do you have any maybe final words or message for us before we wrap it up today?
I think I'm good. I think it's just the lack of it. There's no narrative for listening to us. So start to begin that narrative now. And always ask why we're not in the picture. Because it's never coincidental, you know? I think that's pretty much where I would end it.
Great. Thank you so much, Zaida, for that wonderful, wonderful presentation. I appreciate everybody's interaction in the chat. There were a lot of really great conversations happening in there as well. And I invite you all to continue checking out the programming that we have organized for the next 10 days for MOLA's Afro-Latinx Festival. Stay safe, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Okay, thank you.